Good afternoon. We're up to chapter 2, Mishna 4. We'll wait a little until everyone gets their lunch. Can't compete with food.
Yeah, you never win.
Let's take 2. Good after. Go back now. He used to say, do his will as though it was your will. That means that you have to focus on what is God's will as opposed to your own will. JFK, I need this, I need to make a good living, I need this. He had a whole list, a laundry list of his needs, asking the rabbi for his blessing. And the Rebbe looks at this list and he says, you give me a whole list of things that you need, but there's not a word about why you are needed. And the chassid fainted, and it changed his whole life. He realized that his focus was so much on his own needs and not why he is needed. And that's a very sobering thought that actually is really underlying the words of Rabbi Gamliel here. That God's will is really what counts. You're asking God for what you need, but the first thing is you have to ask yourself, why does God need me? What is my purpose in this world? And when you make your own needs, your own desires conform with God's desires, then you'll have a perfect life.
Doesn't God know what we need?
Certainly God knows what we need.
So why would we ask?
Well, this is not talking about asking God for our needs. That's a separate issue. Prayer is where you ask God for our needs. And the answer why we have to tell God what we need when God knows is because we need it for ourselves. We have to recognize that God is the one who provides us with everything. If you ask Him, you're saying, I know that you are in charge of everything and you will give me my needs. But what He's saying over here is, don't focus on your needs. Focus on God's needs or God's wants. God has no real needs, except when He says, I want you to do this, that becomes His need. But God wants us to do certain things, and if we make God's will conform to our own, then God will make our will conform to His will, that His will be the same thing as our will. But the main point over here is that we should focus on what God's will is. And why does that work? How does that work? How did creation come about? Everything in creation came about with God's will. In the book of Psalms it says, whatever God wanted, He did. Creation is through His will. So when you want to succeed in this world that God created, you have to conform to His will. God didn't just want a world because He had nothing else to do, so He said, I'll spin off a world for myself. I'll make a universe. He didn't need this universe. He created it because He had a certain objective. He had a certain purpose. So when you conform with God's will, then the world has purpose and has meaning. And then God will see to it that your own will also be taken care of. When we pray, the primary prayer is called the Shemona Esrei, the 18 blessings. It starts off with 3 blessings where we praise God, and then the next 11 blessings, next 13 blessings, I should say, is where we ask God for our needs. And the last 3 blessings is where we thank God. So we don't start off with asking God for our needs. We start off with praising God. We start off with recognizing God's role in our lives. And then we ask for our needs. You first have to start off knowing and recognizing God's role in this world. And then you have a right to ask for your needs. You got a question?
Well, I was just going to say, I think when we in the prayers, when we express God's greatness, we don't do that for God. We do that so we recognize God as that.
That's really, absolutely.
We think we're praying to God, but really we're elevating ourselves to
right. When we recognize God's greatness, then that puts us that connects us to God. And when we're connected, we can then say, we want this, we want that. God says, I don't mind you asking me for things, but first you have to recognize what it's all about.
I mean, the Maharal is a reflexive verb, but it's to examine oneself.
That's one of the meanings of tefillah, of self-examination. See, when God created the world, there were actually 2 desires. He desired to create the world. That's the external desire. But what's the internal desire? He wanted that we should make this world a divine place by doing what we're commanded to do. When those 2 desires have to be in alignment, this world has to be a world that not only satisfies God's desire to create a world, it has to be in alignment with what really is the underlying reason for creation. It's like you ask someone, tell me, you work in this and this place. Why do you work? He says, because I get paid. And why do you want to get paid? Because I want to survive, I want to live. So there's an external will. The external will is you want to work. Some people love what they're doing, but not everyone loves what they're doing for a living, but they still make a living. They want to make a living, but that's the external will. What's the internal will? They want to make a living so they can support themselves and their families. That's the inner will. If you separate the inner from the outer will, let's say you work for a living and the boss decided, you're working for me, why should I pay you? Oh, well, I don't mind that as long as I'm working. No, you're only working because you have an inner will. You want to support yourself. If you don't get, some people would say, even if I wouldn't get paid, I would do it. But that's the minority.
Who would say that?
There are some people somewhere in the universe. Yeah, they haven't found all the planets yet, so maybe they'll find a planet where they have people like that. There are people like that. People that say, talking about our dear friend who just passed away, Max. He loved music with such a passion that he did it. Not only he would do it, he did it without getting paid for it. He just loved music and teaching people. So some people, for them, that's the inner and the outer will is the same thing. A person who makes a living from teaching Torah, if he's really steeped in Torah, that's his inner will. It's not just the outer will. Yes, he gets paid for it because he has to make a living, but the inner will and the outer will are in alignment, perfect alignment. But if you're not in perfect alignment, if your outer will is not consistent with your inner will, it doesn't really satisfy what you really want, which is what do we really want? We really want to serve God. So when you make sure that your inner will is in alignment with your outer will, you're in good shape. Then God says, I will satisfy you that you will be able to live a good life. Because your inner will is consistent with your outer will. I'll make sure that your outer will is consistent with your inner will, and you will prosper. When God created the world. The world was naturally in a perfect alignment until Adam and Eve partook of the forbidden fruit, and that created a misalignment. When Abraham came along, Adam and Eve weren't the only people, and Cain killed Abel, and there were the Midrash lists 7 different generations of sins. And that created...
Those exiled the presence of God, those 7?
The 7 created an environment where God's presence was withdrawn from the world. What does that mean? There was a misalignment. The world existed. There was a world, but the world was not conforming to its inner will. Abraham started to reverse that process, and Isaac reversed it even more. 7 generations followed and corrected what was done wrong by the preceding 7 generations, or more, actually more than 7 generations, but 7 different stages. And that created a realignment, or it started the process of realignment, which became complete at Mount Sinai. And once the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, that was the model for the alignment that we have an obligation and we have a mission to fulfill for the next few thousand years. And we're getting closer and closer to that realignment. Yeah, there are hitches here and there. You're on a journey and your car breaks down, and it gives you a little bit of a pause, and then you fix the car, and then you keep on going, and another tire, you have a flat tire, but you're progressing. We're progressing towards an end where there'll be perfect alignment, and that's what the Messianic age is, a perfect alignment. So Rabbi Gamliel was saying we have to work on that God's will and our will are in alignment. What's the connection to the preceding Mishnah? The preceding Mishnah was about government. How Rabbi Gamliel says we have to be very wary about government. So here he's creating a contrast between a secular government and the divine government. A secular government doesn't help you with your alignment with God's will. Secular governments, the best of which are deficient. You can't really rely on them. They look like they love you, but they don't really love you. They're in it for themselves. There's a selfish motive with government. And the best of governments cannot create that alignment. Only a divine government can create that alignment when we conform to the divine government. Now, some people will say, what about theocracies? They seem to have a system where they base everything on their religion, and we know that theocracies didn't exactly work out. You have theocracies today. You have Hamas. That's a theocracy. And what do? They're the mass murderers. They're genocidal maniacs. And they run their government based on belief in God. So there are several points.
Which God?
Whichever God they claim to believe in. But the problem with theocracies is that they are really serving themselves, not really serving God. Because if you read the 10 Commandments, there's a commandment that says, I am the Lord your God that took you out of the land of Egypt. So that's a commandment to recognize God's role. But then parallel to that, you remember there are 2 tablets, and if you read the tablets vertically, they go 1 through 5 and 6 through 10. But if you read them horizontally, which the Midrash says we should, what's the next commandment parallel with the first? Which is commandment number 6?
Not to kill.
Do not kill. Do not commit murder. Why not? What's wrong with murder?
It's not yours to take.
It's not yours to take? Who says I can't take something that's not mine?
Life is not yours to take.
Because if you just say you can't commit murder because it's not right, why isn't it right? You have to go back to commandment number 1. They're parallel. because I am God, you're God, because a human being is created in the image of God. When you commit murder, you're destroying that image of God. It's an affront to God. But if you separate commandment number 6 from commandment number 1, because after all, it's only 6 on the list. It's the least important, you would say, because it's only 6. No, but it's really parallel with number 1. The murder is a direct affront to God, not indirectly, but directly.
Depends how you read it.
So when you talk about theocracies who think we could kill, they're going against God. They're basing their religion on their own personal interests, and they use God as a cloak. They use God as an excuse for what they want to do, because they want this power. Whatever were the reasons, there may be other reasons as well, but they're not really serving God. So on one hand, you have to give them some credit that they do acknowledge the idea of a God, and that sometimes could stop them from committing a crime. You know, even Hamas terrorists, they were not all the same. Some of them did not commit actual crimes as the others, or they're not as heinous as the others, because they still had a certain respect for higher authority. So there's a certain advantage, I'd say, to a theocracy over a communist atheistic regime, because the communist atheistic regimes serve only themselves. They have no higher authority, and they've committed more murder than the theocracies of the world. And I would put it this way: theocracies commit murder in spite of their belief in God. Communists commit murder because of their belief in communism, because of their ideology. The ideology, an atheistic ideology, is really a religious ideology, except the God that they believe in is themselves. Whereas a theocracy, even in the worst case scenario, they still have some in some cases very little, minuscule amount of respect for higher authority. But the common denominator of the two is that they're not really worshiping God. They're worshiping their own belief system, their own interests, their own selfish interests. So that's why the Mishnah over here follows the other Mishnah. You can't claim that you are worshiping God if your government system is no different from a secular government system, because in the end you're going to do what you want to do despite your belief in God. You're going to create God in your own image. See, Judaism, Torah believes that God created us in His image. Pagan worship, which most theocracies are really pagans, they create God in their own image. Their own image of God is what they think it has to be, and then they create their God to satisfy their own interests. The Maharal, the great 16th century sage, says that this Mishnah is a continuation of the one before, which talked about the importance of working for the sake of for communal activism, for people to work for the community. And that's God's will, specifically. God's will is, of course, to do everything that's right, but there's a specific desire that God has when people function as community workers, when people care about the community. It says when God sees people caring for others, God smiles to them. God is very appreciative, more so than when you do something that's good on your own. The more you can do for the community, the more God appreciates. And that's what he means over here, that make your will like his will. That means your life should be subordinated to his will. And what is God's will? God's will is that we should work with the community. But some people will say, if I work for the community, it's going to be at the expense of my own personal needs. It'll be at the expense of my own family. I'm spending so much time with the community. So God says, if you do it for the right reason, if it's not for your own selfish interest, if it's not in order to show off what you're accomplishing, if you're doing it because you want to do it because it's God's will, then God will take care of that. Your will be his will. Whatever you need will be God's need. You'll be carried on the shoulders of God because you're working for Him. You're not working for yourself. The more selfless you are, the more God will take care of your needs. That's the approach of the Maharal. And here, if you look at these, this is the fourth Mishnah. All four Mishnahs seem to be talking about the idea of balance. Rebbe, the first Mishnah starts off that whatever you do, what's the right path? If it has to be beautiful for yourself and beautiful for others. There are many different interpretations, but the idea is that there has to be a balance. Your Judaism has to be beautiful for yourself. It has to be enhancing and edifying for yourself, but it also has to be beautiful for others. So that's a balance in terms of your attitude. Your attitude has to be one for God, for yourself, and for others as well. The next Mishnah was about Torah in Derech Eretz. You have to combine Torah study with Derech Eretz, which was interpreted in many different ways. One of them, you have to have a profession, you have to be a part of this world, you can't just be divorced from the whole world. So that was a balance there. Then the third Mishnah was about government. You have to have a relationship with government. You can't help it because the government is in control. They have the power, but you have to have the right balance. You have to be wary. You can't put your trust in government. Jews cannot put their trust in even the best of governments, pro-Israel and everything, but when they get a plane from Qatar, I'm a little bit upset about that. Qatar is the sponsor of terrorism. Why are you becoming so close to them? These are evil people.
That's because it's a business.
Okay, so business trumps security and decency. That's wrong.
Ethics. Trumps ethics.
It trumps ethics, right. So
If you can make so much money for America.
the government can say it's very pro-Israel, pro-Jewish and everything, and they are, but you can't put your trust, because for business reasons, they'll come to a conclusion that Israel is not so important. We don't have to support them totally. We can support them partially. So there has to be a certain balance. You appreciate the government for what it does good, but don't put your trust in them. And this Mishnah, the balance is the balance between personal and communal interests. You have to have the balance between the two. One of the commentators, known as the Bar Tanura, there's a wine called Bar Tanura. Well, this rabbi apparently knew that in 500 years later they're going to have a wine with that name. So Bar Tanura is the name of a city in Italy where this rabbi was from, and someone decided to name a wine out of that city. Why did they decide to do that? Because it's interesting. This has nothing to do with what we're learning, but it's just cute. There was someone who started a kosher wine company called Rashi. Now, why is it called Rashi? Because the father or grandfather of the one who started the company's initials were Rashi. But Rashi was a vintner. So I guess there were both reasons. So he decided to name a kosher wine after Rashi, who produced wine. So someone decided, well, if a wine can be called Rashi, well, let's name a wine after another great rabbi. And they named it Bar Tanura. And someone came along and they named the wine Rambam. And someone came along and named wine Rekanati, which is another great rabbi. So that seems to be a new trend to name your wine company.
Wine named Eliyahu too.
What?
There's a new wine called Eliyahu.
Eliyahu, okay. So there are still a few rabbis' names left, so if you try to start a wine
Soon to be
company.
Rabbi Greenberg. Too yet.
So the Bar Tanura says the following. What does it mean that do his will as though it was your will? Just like your will, when you do something you really want to do, you do it with gusto, you do it with enthusiasm, you do it with excitement. You're not just going to do it because you have to go ahead and do it, you have no choice. You show enthusiasm. The same way when you do God's will, it shouldn't be, you know what choice do I have? God wants me to do it, I'll do it. It should be done with excitement and enthusiasm. I have an opportunity to be connected to God. I have an opportunity to show my love and my appreciation, my gratitude to God. It should be done with tremendous amount of feeling and fervor and excitement. And a practical example of that is, when it comes to money, money is a funny thing. Sometimes when it comes to money, we act in very strange ways. Present company excluded, of course. There are people out there. When it comes to, let's say we want a good steak, and you know that a good steak in a good restaurant is going to cost us, what does a good steak cost? $40, $50,
$90.
$90. But I want to enjoy my steak, and I'm willing to splurge on it. If you want a nice car, you know, I can get a car for what a cars cost now, $20,000, $30,000.
It's a bicycle.
Yeah, 35.
Okay, but I want a good, nice car would have all the bells and whistles. I'll spend $60,000 for it. But when it comes to doing a mitzvah, mezuzah could cost you, the cheapest mezuzah could cost you now $40, $50, which is, I don't know how the scribe makes a living from that. But if you want to, what?
You talk about the cloth, not the cover.
The parchment itself could cost close to that. But, and it's skilled labor, a few hours to write a mezuzah, and if he makes one mistake, the mezuzah has to rewrite from the beginning.
Can't you erase it?
No, you can't.
Yeah.
You can't.
You can use like white.
You could erase it, but if you already wrote things afterwards, whatever you wrote afterwards can't be used because it has to be written in order.
And you can't cut and paste.
You want to erase everything, you're going to spend even more time. It'll be more expensive. And also God's name you can't erase. So if you made a mistake, you're in trouble. But whatever it is, if a person says, well, a good kosher mezuzah, a beautiful mezuzah, and the different qualities of mezuzah can cost you $200. Someone said, well, I'm not going to spend $200 on a mezuzah. But you were willing to spend $200 to splurge in a restaurant with good steak and wine and everything like that. So the Bartanura says, the same way you would splurge for you. Now, not everyone could afford to buy a good steak, and people will economize on it. But we're talking about people who are willing to spend maximum amounts because this is something they really want. And they're willing to save up for that. That's how their attitude should be when it comes to doing a mitzvah, doing God's will. There's a passage in the Talmud. How can you tell a person's character? There are three ways. Bekoso, I'm not sure about the order. Bekoso, Bekiso, and Picasso. It has nothing to do with the artist. Picasso. Nothing to do with him. But what are these three things? Kiso means your pocket, your wallet, your money. Koso is your cup, your drinking, your alcohol intake. And kaso, your anger. We'll start with anger. When a person gets angry, and certain things will come out that you never knew about that person, that tells you a little bit more about the person's personality that the person may have not shown beforehand. Koso, when you drink, some things will come out about the person that you never knew. And then Bikiso, when it comes to money, your pocket. When it comes to money, then you discover the nature of a person, how good they are, how kind they are, how involved they are with the materialistic things. It's when it comes to money. So Bartanura is telling us when it comes to doing things for yourself, you're willing to spend. You should do the same thing when it comes to doing God's will, when it comes to doing a mitzvah. Some people, again, present company excluded, of course, will see a synagogue built beautifully, multi-million-dollar synagogue. I know a synagogue in New Jersey. I have a nephew who's a Chabad rabbi there. I think that synagogue cost them $22 million. People will say, with all that money, you can do so many good things. People don't understand. If you can raise $22 million for your own home, you would not turn it down. I'm not talking about everyone. There are many people. Why do you begrudge the synagogue? That's God's home. That should be the nicest place. Actually, according to Jewish law, the shul has to be the nicest place in the community. If you could afford a shack, the shul should be a little bit nicer than a shack. If If you're poor, obviously you can't afford a $22 million building, but you should be nicer. If you could afford a nice house, your shul should be even nicer. If you could afford a mansion, and we're talking about a community in New Jersey where everyone there is, it's near Deal, New Jersey. I don't know if you're familiar with Deal, New Jersey.
We've been there.
But you have, I'm sure, a few billionaires there, and then many, what's his name, the local magnate, what's his name? What? Jamal. Douglas Jamal is from that area, Deal, New Jersey. He owns half of Buffalo.
Jamal.
What's his last name?
He's a Syrian Jew. But the point is, no one's saying you have to build a shul for $22 million. The point is, we shouldn't begrudge the use of money for something spiritual, because that's what it was created. Why was money created? There's a midrash that says, God says, you know why I created gold? I only created gold for one purpose, to build the temple. The temple should be built with gold, because it's the most beautiful metal, it's the most expensive metal. What about everyone else? Could anyone else use gold? So God says, once I created it, I allow everyone to benefit from it as well. But it was created for one purpose. Beauty was created for one purpose, for God's glory. But God says, I'm allowing you, if you use beauty, and I'm talking about in terms of money, but it also means in every other area. If you can give my best, my wealth, my spiritual wealth, my intellectual wealth, my emotional wealth, and my material, physical wealth, if I want to benefit from it, I have to realize that its main reason for it being created was for God's purpose. And God in His infinite kindness says, if you use it for me, I'll let you use it for yourself. I'll let you benefit from it as well. I don't begrudge you using it for yourself. I don't begrudge you living, with having all this wealth. Again, not only material wealth, all forms of wealth. As long as we know what wealth was really created for. Putting aside wealth, you get up in the morning and it's 3 feet of snow, but you have to go to work. So you'll dig out of that snow because I have to go to work. What about if you don't have to go to work, but there's a minyan in the shul, 6:45 a.m. It says, well, today I'm staying in bed. Today I'm not going out because there's 3 feet of snow. So the Bartanura says, well, let's put it in the positive way. You say 3 foot of snow, but I'm going to pray to God. I'm going to study Torah. I'm going to come out no matter what, just like I would for if this would be my livelihood. Make His will like your will. Treat His will as if you would treat your own. Certainly not less, but at least as much. And if you do even more, that's even greater. There's a story in the Torah where Jacob returns from his uncle Lavan to meet his brother Esav. Esav wanted to kill him. Why? Because he appropriated the blessings from his father. He stole the blessings. So now Jacob is coming back 22 years later. He doesn't know if Esav is going to like him or hate him and threaten his life. So he sends a message to his brother, and the message is, I lived with Lavan. So why is he telling him he lived with Lavan? Does Esav care where he lived, with whom he lived? So Rashi says that I didn't learn from him and his ways. The simple meaning is I didn't become evil like him. I'm still a righteous person. Why would that impress Esav? Esav was not interested in righteousness. He was interested in material things. So one commentator, and I don't remember who it is who says this, he says he meant to say, I didn't emulate him. I didn't copy him in a positive way. I'm not so righteous. What does it mean I didn't copy him? One of the lessons that we have to use in our lives, when we see evil and we see the passion with which people do evil, we're supposed to learn a lesson from that. If people could have so much passion in doing things that are evil, how much more so that we should have that passion for doing good? Why should we find people spending their lives protesting, living in tents, and doing horrible things that shows how much passion they have for what they're evil? We should show that we have that passion for doing good. So Jacob was trying to tell Esau, don't think I'm such a righteous person. I never learned from love and I never took his lesson of passion. I'm not a passionate person. I'm an average guy. Don't be jealous of me. Don't think I'm so great. In other words, when we see, the Baal Shem Tov said that everything a person sees or hears has to serve as a lesson. Rabbi Zusha, the famous Hasidic master, once said there are 7 things you could learn from a thief. And he listed 7 different traits that a thief has, that you could use those traits in order to serve God. Like the thief doesn't try to show off his prowess. When he goes in to break in, he doesn't say, here I am, I'm breaking into the bank now.
You're not watching enough police TV shows.
There are always exceptions to every rule. But he does everything modestly. Same thing, we should be modest in the things that we do. We shouldn't try to show off everything. But he went on to seven lessons you can learn from a thief. There was a chassid who left Russia, a very famous chassid, Mendel Futterfass, who spent 8 years, I think, in Soviet prison. And he said, Rabbi Zusha apparently said 7 things. He probably never spent time in prison. I could learn many more than 7 things from thieves. He spent those years with thieves, Russian thieves, and he learned many, many positive lessons. So when the Bartanura is telling us that we should see that what is our will should be the same as God's will. God's will should be the same as our will. We should do it with the same passion that we do things. And even more, we should learn even more from those people who do evil with passion. Now, the way he puts it over here is do his will as though it was your will. Shouldn't it have said your will should be like his will? And the answer is God's will comes before our will. Not just chronologically, but also the essence of our existence is God's will. Our will is superimposed on God's will. God's will comes first, and then we have our will. That's not the way we think. Most people, and even good people, and even spiritual people, feel the first thing you feel, I exist, and a God also exists. And I will put God in my life, impose it on my life. But that's not the reality. The reality is that God's existence is real. That's the true reality. Superimposed on God's reality is our reality. So if it would have said that our will should be like God's will, it's like saying that our will is there and it should be like God's will. No, God's will comes first. We have to first recognize it's God's will that comes first. When we wake up in the morning, the first thing we're supposed to recite, as soon as we open our eyes and we're conscious, is Moda Ani, which translates as I am thankful to you, the eternal living King, that he restored my soul to me. Great is your faithfulness. Those words of Moda Ani, if you translate it in English, it's I give thanks. That's the English syntax. But the Hebrew syntax is the opposite. Thanks I give. You don't start with I. You start with thanks. Thanks means you're acknowledging someone else. The first thing you do in the morning is you acknowledge that you're not the first thing, you're the second thing. You come after acknowledging that there is a God and you're grateful. And you're saying, who is grateful? I. The I is the secondary thing. So that's why it says, make his will like your will. His will comes first.
Well, it's the center of things. We've been given free will, so we have choice. We can exert what we want, or we can recuse ourselves to give everything to God, and then God gives us what He wants for us.
Right, but what comes first? God's will comes first. Not chronologically, of course. God created the world, so He was there first. but also in reality of things is our reality is a secondary reality. When we think I'm aware of what myself, my existence, that's a superimposed reality. And that's what we have to focus on. But now here we have two clauses over here. One is do his will as though it was your will. And the next part is set aside your will in the face of his will. So it sounds like it's talking about the difference between doing good and refraining from evil. The first thing is doing good. That his will should be like your will. That you should do the right things, positive things, that conform to God's will. God wants you to do a mitzvah, you do the mitzvah. But then there's also what is called sur meirah, keeping away from evil. That you want to do something evil, put aside your will so that he may set aside the will of others for the sake of your will. So which comes first? Doing good comes before keeping away from evil. But that's inconsistent with the verse in Psalms. Sur meirah, keep away from evil, v'asei tov, and do good. Here the order is reversed. Why is the order reversed? So there can be several explanations. One explanation is, when it comes to doing evil, before you can do good, you have to first stop doing evil. If someone comes and says, I'm going to commit a crime, you first have to stop the person from committing the crime before you can start talking to him about doing good things. You want to raise money for your $22 million building. Do you come to this thief and you say, could you please donate? But meanwhile, he's in the process of engaging in some type of a Ponzi scheme. He says, well, I'm doing this Ponzi scheme. Let me see. The first thing you're supposed to tell him, stop with that Ponzi scheme. That's not kosher.
Right.
Then when you finish with that evil and you're starting to behave like a normal person, then I'll talk to you about donating the money for the shul. When it comes to evil, outright evil and good, first you have to get rid of the evil, and then you can do the good. Now, it doesn't mean you can't start doing good first, but it means the focus has to be, you have to first deal with the negative. But when you're talking about, we're not dealing with actual evil, we're dealing with personality traits, we're dealing with different attitudes. You can't wait until you're a pure person before you start doing good. Number one, if you're going to wait, you're never going to succeed in doing good, because you'll always say, I'm not pure enough. There was a story of a great rabbi who was supposed to be the lead of service, and he went up to the front of the shul to lead the service, and he couldn't start, and he left. So his disciple said to him, why did you leave? He says, because when I started to realize how so many levels that this service entails, I don't feel I'm able to reach all those levels. So the other rabbi said to him, if you're going to keep on doing that, you'll never do anything. You should do it on the basic level, and then you'll get to the next level, and then you'll get to the next level. For example, the Talmud says that a person should never say, I'm not going to study Torah or do a mitzvah because I have no pure motives. I'm doing it for ulterior motives. You shouldn't do that. You should say, I'll do it for the wrong reason, do the right thing, because eventually from doing the right thing for the wrong reason, you will come to do the right thing for the right reason. But if you'll say, I'm never going to do the right thing because I don't have the pure motive, you know what's going to happen? You'll never do it either. You'll never change, and you'll never do the right thing. So when it comes to different attitudes, you should never delay doing what's good, because you're imperfect. There's no limit to perfection. Do the good thing. Why? Because when you do something good, you generate light. And when you generate light, it makes things much more clear to you. Then you're more capable of getting rid of the imperfections. So there are times when you have to first deal with the negative, and there are times when you have to first deal with the positive.